Good afternoon. I am here with, I have to say, one of the biggest perks of being part of the YA community is getting invited to interview YA authors and meeting the minds behind the twisted stories. And I want to say a special thanks to Madeline. She's brought this group of people together again. I think this is her third year running in the YA Thriller Con. I hope that none of them ever physically get together, because that would make the best murder mystery ever, because then everybody would be like, it would be the whodunit. And today I'm super excited because I get to interview Andreina Cordani. She is the author of The Girl Who, Dead Lucky, Twisty, terrifying YA thrillers that surprise. And she says, I write young adult thrillers about people in impossible emotional situations with a little bit of murder thrown in. And so I want to begin by asking Andreina, being a teenager is hard enough. What attracts you to make their lives even more complicated and difficult?
Well, that's kind of what we like to do, don't we? We create these characters and we say we love them. And then we do awful things to them. I think for me, I'm attracted to writing stuff that has high stakes. So, there's sort of some kind of thriller or a race against time, or there's a murder involved or something like that. I like reading about high stakes, so I like writing about them too. And then I think if you throw in teenagers who, when you're in your teens, you're figuring out who you are. Other people are pressuring you to be someone that you're not, or to be this person. You want to be that person, and you've got all this pressure on you generally through just like figuring out life and everything. So just throw in a murder as well.
Why not?
Extra torture, like you say.
Well, you're having a bad day anyway, so we're just going to kill somebody off.
Pretty much. My first book, The Girl Who, wasn't really supposed to be a thriller originally. I hadn't decided what I wanted to do with it. I just it's about the story of The Girl Who is about a girl who was witnessed her mother and sister's murder when she was a child, when she was 7, and since then she went on. Her dad formed a charity to kind of help stop street violence, and she became like a poster girl for the charity. She became famous and everything, and so she it was about like what it would be to grow up in that situation. And I couldn't really decide whether to make it a contemporary about her finding herself, or a thriller about her finding the dude that did it and tracking him down and beating out some justice. So I tried to do both, and then I ended up, I think I just was binge reading so many thrillers. I was doing book reviews for Good Housekeeping at the time, and just ended up binging massive amounts of twisty thrillers, and I just got really fascinated with it, so it became a bit more of a psychological thriller.
I have a question regarding that, because I think sometimes thrillers can be a little bit cathartic, or they can be something we can read and count on, because in real life things oftentimes don't come to wrapped up conclusions, I suppose. So what do you think about that aspect of the thriller? And do you think as an author you're allowed to deviate from that and leave your readers without that sort of denouement, the ending that makes them say, okay?
Yeah, I think you can break those rules, but you have to leave your reader feeling satisfied. I think that's the key. You can have a completely open ending as long as the reader feels satisfied that they have got everything they want out of that story. So I guess you could have a whodunit where you don't find out who done it, but as long as the reader has been on a journey with these characters and has come to the end of it and feels that some change has happened and that they're satisfied with the way the story's turned out, then then you can get away with it. But you would have to write a flipping good story to get away with not revealing who done it. I think you can bend the rules, but you have to be very good at what you're doing and know what you're doing.
Well, speaking of rules and thrillers and this idea of inevitable endings, they don't necessarily have to be obvious, but inevitable.
Yeah.
You have really surprise endings. I'm not going to give any spoilers. How do you pull that off and stay authentic to the story? Because it can't be something out of left field. It has to be something the reader says, oh, and is that a huge challenge?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of fun in a way, in that you have to seed the ideas. Like if you've got a twist or something, you have to seed the ideas in, so you can't just say, oh, it was a random psychopath came in and did it. That's not satisfying, is it? So that there needs to be a sort of a twist where, if you look back, you can go, oh, that's why that thing happened, and that's why that thing happened. And I mean, I was just sort of talking about this in the interview I did with Kat Ellis, where with a good twist makes you go like, the first thing you do is go, oh, and then the second thing you do is go, oh yeah. And that's really satisfying. But with Dead Lucky, there's a couple of like revelations in there, and because I knew what they were throughout, and I was, carefully seeding my things, I had no idea the proportion of people who were going to guess it, so I was really nervous because I thought it was going to be obvious to everybody. And then when I sent it to my editor, she obviously knew what the twists were because she had read the synopsis, but she'd forgotten, and she was completely surprised. So that was quite a relief.
And that's hard too, because you think it's so obvious. Oh, I got to take that out, but it's not. But yeah, you don't want the Scooby-Doo. It was the drugstore guy, and then he takes his mask off. Yeah, but it is kind of fun. That is fun. I want to go back to your process, because you began interviewing real people, which is interesting because you had these real life interviews and you're like, wow, how do I murder them? And so how I think it's really satisfying, both careers, as you continue to build both of your careers, the journalism and meeting people and the fiction writing. Can you talk a little bit about your process and the differences? And are you continuing to write in your magazines? And
I haven't done much real life for a while, for various reasons. One of them being, I've been writing 2 young adult thrillers, and we had a lockdown and stuff, and so I had a lot on. So I haven't done any real life for a while. Journalism is a very different place now, and it can be quite a tricky place to navigate. And I really enjoy making stuff up, so I've been sort of concentrating on that side of things. But I started out working for women's weekly magazines, which, I mean, you wouldn't so much be familiar with, but UK readers might have heard of Take a Break. The magazine I was in was like Take a Break, only sort of sold slightly fewer, so it wasn't quite so famous. And it was all, I had stories like, my love rat ran off with all my savings, and then there was the funny ones. Guinea pig ate my diamond was a particular one. Whereas the story of a woman who had her engagement ring, and the guinea pig kind of clicked it out with his teeth and ate the diamond, which caused a slight delay. There was, a couple of days delay, and then they went back in again. To wait for it to come out the other end. But so I interviewed so many people, like, who've been through so many different things, and it was really, hopefully they got something out of it as well. They were in the magazine, they got to share their story and raise awareness. But for me, I learned so much about how they're different. Every person reacts to one situation in a million different ways. Like, the way you would react to something happening to you that is completely different to how I would react. And some people, like, you just don't understand how they react. And those are the ones that really interested me, trying to get under the skin of, why would you do that? Why would you do that? So, a lot of people I spoke to had done some quite crazy, foolish things over the years, and just getting under the skin of, like, why did you think you took that choice? And and looking into that was just really interesting. And I think that really helps when you're writing about different characters who aren't like me.
Well, and why YA and not adult? Or have you done adult thrillers, or are you interested in it, or what interests you more in the YA market?
Well, I never say never to anything. I've never met a genre I didn't like, pretty much. So I would write anything and everything if I was given the opportunity and the time. But I've been, the first book I wrote was YA, and then that one's sort of, it's in the cupboard somewhere. And the second book I wrote was YA, and I think it's just because it's what I was saying earlier about that being really interested in that transition where you're figuring out who you are. And you've got all these things going on in your life that are just coming at you, and at the same time, if you also have to solve some impossible murder or something, it's sort of there's just something really appealing about that process of identity and coming of age and figuring out, trying to negotiate who you want to be against the world that's pushing you in the other direction or pushing you to be something else. Or your parents have got expectations and your friends think you're this, and actually you've got this secret, and that really interests me. I think the other thing is as well that I was a lousy teenager, so I just keep reliving it.
I would never wish the teenage years on anybody ever again. That's true. It's nice to pass through.
I was rubbish.
It was, yeah. It's so nice to not be there anymore, but also appreciate. I have a teenage daughter right now, and I just love who she is.
Yeah,
it's better.
The great thing about it is like this: you're on the threshold, and like everything's in front of you, and it's really exciting and also really terrifying. And it's just really interesting to write about. Keep going back there.
I have a question in terms of thinking more about Dead Lucky. It's really based on, and this is new for me too, because I'm an immigrant to this whole social media thing and influencers and all this kind of world of like famous for being famous. It's an interesting concept. What is your relationship with social media, and is that reflected in your books? And what is your relationship with this influencer madness? I'm curious if you personally.
Yeah. So obviously I'm not a digital native. I didn't grow up online. And I, as a journalist as well, you're always taught not to make yourself the story. You are not the story. So, even when a couple of times I've written opinion pieces or memoir, like emotional memoirs about myself, I really find it really, really hard to do that. So it's kind of, for social media, it's kind of getting rid of that and shrugging that off is really hard. But I have within me an inner massive show off who would have absolutely loved to have grown up in this time. And I would have been all over TikTok and just, the fact that you can contact, because the way I was saying about being a rubbish teenager was I wasn't cool, I wasn't geeky, I was into stuff nobody else was into, and I would have been able to find my tribe if I'd had social media. I'd have been able to find the other historical fiction nerds to talk about why that particular carriage in Bridgerton should not have been in Bridgerton. So I would have been able to find my tribe a bit more, which I wasn't able to. But with the influencers themselves, I find them fascinating, but not the actual content. I find what happens to them, like the social situations, really fascinating that they're in. The Dead Lucky characters are really more based on YouTubers than anything else. And when I was writing it, there'd been a lot of YouTube meltdowns. Like, it was almost becoming a trope of YouTubers just going, I can't do this anymore, and sobbing on screen and having a breakdown and saying, I'm quitting. And then obviously 2 weeks they're back. But the fact is, these people had all been making a video every single day since they were like 16 years old or something. And they're all getting into their late teens, early 20s and trying to figure out, like, they'd grown up on screen, and they were again trying to figure out who they were, and they were changing, and their audience wasn't changing. And So it was. I was just watching a lot of the very big successful ones misbehaving, being problematic, doing stuff just to get attention. Then there was these poor brothers in the States whose father died after a long illness, and they announced their father was dying, and there were people hashtagging, funeral meetup, and fans had found out where the funeral was, and they were all just going to go to the funeral. So that was fascinating too, this idea that the fans just felt like they owned these guys and they were just going to show up. And I'm sure a lot of them were showing up to be supportive, but some of them were showing up just so they could meet their idols, and they just said there's no boundaries there. So that was interesting to explore.
Well, and the blurred lines between public and private. I'm like you, I'm an immigrant to this I'm not very savvy online, and I'm not that interested. I can't take a selfie to save my life. And those blurred lines are super uncomfortable. I don't know, but it's what teens are growing up with. Yeah. And I sometimes feel a little bit like an old fogey. I don't know. Does that ever...
Well, that's the funny thing is, obviously, like, I wanted to write about it, but at the same time, I couldn't write it. My reaction as a hip young woman is different to somebody who's grown up with it. So I didn't want it to be condemnatory of influencers or of living online or sharing a life online, because that's what people do these days, and they don't have such a problem with it as we do. But at the same time, I would just want to look into like what it's like being in the public gaze and being fixed into this role that people expect of you. But without sounding like, someone's grandmother going, "Oh, you really shouldn't do that. It's not so."
Totally.
I hope I did, because the intention. I've sort of got a lot of respect for these people as well, and admiration for the fact that they, you're not airheaded being a YouTuber or whatever. You have to be smart to figure it out. I mean, a lot of them have got excellent management, obviously, but you have to be smart to figure out what content people like, and to keep producing it and to keep fresh. You have to be imaginative. So, I've got respect for people who make that kind of content. It's really cool. So yeah, it was hard to kind of, step back and step out of my older person persona, but hopefully I did it.
No, absolutely, because it's hard. And it's here. It is what it is, and so I think
the way people
not using it wouldn't make sense anymore.
Yeah, it's like social media is kind of like the water that everyone swims in now. It's there all around us, and we don't really even notice it. Or certainly the younger people, it's just part of their lives. Even if they don't use it, even if they've decided they don't want to, be on social media, it's still there. All of their friends are on it, or that's the way gossip gets around, or stories get around. So everyone has to live with it. It's just here to stay. It's going to change in ways we can't really predict, but it's here to stay.
Yeah, unless, like we talked about, the apocalypse, you can write that in your next novel, the apocalypse, and like the Y2K, but a little later. Tell me, are you working on something new?
Oh, loads of things. So yeah, I'm currently working on a YA thriller. I've got an adult crime idea in my head, another adult crime idea, maybe a little bit more on the go, and like about 2 more YAs queued up in my head that I haven't actually done anything for yet.
And when can we expect your next book to come out?
Your guess is as good as mine.
Okay, that's a horrible question, because I know I'm a writer
for a while.
No,
yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about your next YA thriller, or is it still in work in progress and it's best to keep it under wraps? Because I tend to be superstitious, and sometimes I don't like to talk about things that are still underdeveloped.
The only thing I'll say, I suppose, it's like a lot of mine. It's got a friendship at the middle of it. It's very character based. There's a violent person on the loose, someone has to track them down, and there's a bit of social media, but it's not all about social media. It's, you know, just there, like I said, in people's lives.
I can't wait. I'm excited to.
Oh,
well, when it's more out there, we'll be excited to read it. Now, in your 2 published books right now, do you have a character you really wish you could know in real life? Is there one of your characters you could say, oh, I love this character. I wish this character could come and spend the day with me?
I think in Dead Lucky, there's a character called Frida, who is very colourful, very flamboyant, doesn't take anything from anyone. Is quite good with comebacks, and has an excellent array of accessories. And I think I would probably like to hang out with Frida for a day, and she can give me lessons in not taking any crap from anyone, and then I can borrow some of her clothes. So Frida, I'd look ridiculous in them because I'm, you know, quite a few years older than her, but hey, I'd like to.
That's nice. And have you noticed as a writer, sometimes your supporting cast, you bring out things that it's sometimes easier to make a supporting cast that's a little bit more out there than your main characters?
I think, yeah, I think I tend to try and create characters who are very different from me, and end up creating characters who are a bit similar to me in certain ways.
Mm-hmm.
So and maybe they're a little bit the way I want to be, or a little bit the way I don't want to be. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, like my supporting cast, I suppose, you know, I have less in common with them than my main characters, but you still kind of feed from your own life into theirs, I suppose.
Yes. Okay, we talked about.
Sorry.
No worries. What?
I was going to say, who was your character that you would like to spend time with?
In the books I've read, or in the books I've written, it's always my supporting cast characters. Because for similar reasons, because I feel like there's one named Mara who is so strong and so, like, I don't care what anybody thinks. She's just so herself.
Yeah.
And I love that about her, because unapologetically so, but without needing to be more than who she is either.
Yeah.
And another one, Chase, who's like 12, and same. He has so much like kindness in him, and he's so comfortable with who he is. And I think I was awkward, so I really appreciate those characters who are okay, because we're all awkward. Everybody's weird. Everybody's awkward, but we just don't see it when we're growing up, I don't think.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It's one of those things that, I mean, you could even tell someone, like, honestly, everyone's going through this. It's fine. You'll feel okay in a few years, and you'll grow into yourself. And people won't believe you, because you have to go through it and you have to experience it to come through the other end.
And it's so visceral at that age. Everything is so, like you said, in your face, and everything is so now and difficult. And so,
but the other thing is, I mean, this is another reason that I write YA. The other thing is that so much of what is happening in the world at the moment centers around young people. So, you know, with all the social change caused by social media, obviously they're at the forefront of that. They're leading conversations on LGBTQ. They are, you know, there's kind of, you know, there's super hackers. They're all about 12 years old. There's so many things have teenagers at the heart of them at the moment that are happening. So many important things. The environmental, obviously, climate change campaigns is being led by people in their teens and their early 20s. So, you know, it's all happening at the moment, and YAs are at the center of it.
This is true, and they're so much more empowered, and they have so many more avenues to express themselves than we did when I did when I was.
Yeah, it's like things are better, but also worse. Things are like, there's a lot more kindness, I think, now from the teenagers I speak to. There's a lot. I mean, obviously they're readers, so they're all lovely, but there's a lot more kindness, a lot more understanding of diversity, etc. But also things are harder for them because they're more exposed and they can, be bullied in more different ways. And so, yeah, it's a roundabout.
We had talked just by email about the worst questions we've been asked as authors. So I have to ask you, is there a question you wish somebody would ask you, you've always wanted to answer, but have never been asked? Is that a really bad question?
I don't remember us talking about this because I haven't given it thought. Question that I always want people to ask. It's interesting because I kind of partly, I think I've kind of partly covered it in terms of people ask me about people asking why I write YA. And you also covered the other thing that people are too scared to ask, which is, if you're going to be rude, you say, okay, so you're an old gimmer. How do you understand social media? So you've actually covered the ones that people haven't really asked so far, which is great. I think we've covered it.
And just to give the viewers a sense, Andreina and I were talking about when people say, if you had to take one book to Desert Island, what book would you take to it forever? And we're just like, well, first of all, I think I don't need a book right now. I need other things.
Yeah, and what about a book folds out into a life raft? That would be brilliant.
Or we get Wilson. I mean, we've all seen Tom Hanks movie, but anyway, Tom Cruise, sorry. Anyway, okay, finally. Before we wrap this up, I have to ask you, because some of the people here are going to be readers, but maybe many people are writers. So what advice would you give to somebody who wants to write for this market or any market as a professional?
Okay. So I wasted a really long time thinking I wasn't good enough to write, and thinking writing was a selfish thing, that I had to prioritize other things, that I wasn't ready because I hadn't lived enough or had enough heartbreak or whatever. And I wish that I had spent that time just writing, not necessarily to be published. And this is the good thing about the way things are now, is that you can, have a little Substack, or you can, keep a blog or something. But I wish I had just kept writing and honing my skills, because I feel like I'm playing catch up now. So my advice would be to everyone, just keep writing. Doesn't matter what it is. And the other thing that I would also, because even if it's rubbish, it gets better. At least once it's rubbish, it exists, and then you can go back and make it better. But the other thing I'd also say is, I used to think that I had to do it all by myself, all alone in my room, and then come out with a book and go, ta-da! And then the world would go, oh! And I think I realized quite quickly that wasn't going to work. But it took me a long time to realize how important it is to have support networks and other writers to share your work with, and to even just talk about myself online as a writer, and to sort of make connections with people, because it sort of helps you realize you're not alone. It helps you realize all the stuff you're going through, staring at your manuscript thinking you're rubbish today and you can't even spell. That's all normal. It's sort of, it really helps you learn. And so I wish I had gone out and found my tribe earlier. Those are two things.
And then I think that I love what you said, everything that you said there. I agree. And that was not my last question. My last question is, where can people find you on social media? Because we all have to find your books, and we have to find out what you're posting. So please tell us, where can we find you? Hold it up again, please. There you go.
It's so shiny and pink and blue. It's lovely.
And it smells good.
It smells good, yeah. So you can find me on Twitter and on Instagram, I'm Andreina Cordani. So you have to figure out how to spell my really hard to spell name. And then on TikTok, I am A Cordani XO because I don't know, I just joined Twitter to be anonymous, then decided I wanted to start posting.
Fabulous. So everybody, please follow Andreina. Get her books.
Buy my books.
Don't read her books before bed. Maybe. You can. I'm just a pansy. I'm one of those people who have to read.
But you write about some pretty dark stuff as well. I mean, it's emotional stuff. It's
more emotional and it's less thriller. And usually there isn't a scary murderer in my books. So I agree it can be dark, but I'm a scaredy cat. But I do read in the mornings, and I recommend everybody read these books, follow Andreina, and follow her advice to keep writing. And I recommend everybody check out the YA Thriller Con schedules. There are so many great interviews and panels and authors to learn from, so you can soak up all this wonderfulness. And again, special thanks to Madeline Dyer for putting